The wagon creaked beneath her as the wind pulled dust like a veil across the prairie road. She rode alone, back straight, hands firm on the reins, though the mule barely needed guiding. The sun was low and aching. Amber light poured through the branches like sorrow made visible. She hadn't spoken in miles. She hadn't needed to. Words had long since become currency she couldn't afford. The sign read Dust Bell, half hung and swinging like a tired arm in the wind. The town looked no different than others she'd passed through. Weathered storefronts, boots on railings, eyes behind curtains. But this one had offered her work, and that was more than most. She stepped down with a stiffness that betrayed more than travel. Her dress, faded blue, had been mended more times than it had been worn whole. A skillet hung from her pack. It thudded once against her hip as she walked, the sound sharp and certain. She passed the sheriff, a man with graying hair and a dog asleep at his boots. He watched her without moving. "That her?" someone whispered behind the mercantile screen door. "The one they sent for Granger?" "Widower must be desperate," another voice muttered, softer. "Or drunk." She heard them. Of course she did. Words cling to air in places this small. But she didn't stop, didn't look. Shame was a familiar hum now, low and constant like a second heartbeat. She kept walking until the town thinned and the open land returned, the road curving toward the foothills. She saw the ranch before she saw the man. A fence weathered to silver gray. A barn that leaned like it had one more winter left in it. Smoke curling from the chimney. And there, beside a split-rail gate, stood Elias Granger, hands in his pockets, eyes shadowed beneath a worn brim. He didn't tip his hat. Didn't move to greet her. Just looked. "You're the cook," he said, flat as a shovel's edge. She nodded once. "Yes. Don't need conversation. Don't need meddling. House is clean. Boy, don't speak. You feed us, that's all." "I understand." His eyes narrowed like he was searching for a flaw he hadn't named yet. Then he stepped aside. She followed him to the porch, boots clacking against dry wood. Inside, the house was spare. No curtains, no photographs, just wood and stone and silence. A table with 2 chairs. A narrow staircase. The scent of old ash and something sharper. Loneliness, maybe. He pointed to the kitchen. "Stove works. Pantry's half full. You'll find the boy upstairs." He won't answer. She didn't ask why. She just set her pack down and untied her apron. The first meal she cooked was rabbit stew, thickened with cornmeal and silence. Elias sat at the table and ate without speaking, eyes on his bowl. She set a second plate at the end of the table, untouched. Later, she placed it outside a door upstairs, knocking once, softly. In the morning, the plate was empty. The spoon washed and left on the floor. She started rising earlier. Lit the fire before dawn, hands stiff in the cold. She baked bread and scrubbed pans, swept corners that hadn't been swept since grief settled in. She didn't ask questions. She didn't open doors she hadn't been invited through. The boy stayed unseen. Small footsteps above her. A cough. Once, she caught him watching from the stairs as she folded laundry. He didn't speak. Just turned and vanished like smoke. The second week, she hung her apron beside the door, neatly like a promise. The townsfolk had stopped pretending not to notice her. When she rode in for flour, they muttered just loud enough. No ring on her finger. "Looks like one of them women who lost something. Or took it." She didn't reply. Shame had taught her long ago that protest only stokes fire. But one Sunday, a pale-haired woman approached her outside the church fence. "You were married," she said flatly. The cook nodded. "No children?" Her mouth pressed tight. "Not anymore." The woman sniffed like that was confirmation. Then turned and left. That night, Elias leaned against the porch post, watching the dark roll in. She handed him coffee, hands brushing once. He didn't pull away. "They talk," he said. "They always do." He didn't answer right away. Then, "He used to laugh, you know. My boy." She looked down at her cup. "And now?" "He listens. Like the world's a dog that bit him once." They didn't speak after that. But something hung in the air between them, not warmth exactly, but the absence of cold. Weeks passed. The house softened. She brought in wildflowers. A red cloth on the table. One afternoon, the boy left a piece of birch bark beside the sink. On it, drawn in coal, a horse with wide eyes and crooked hooves. She didn't comment. Just placed it on the mantel. She began humming as she worked. Old songs, wordless tunes her mother had sung in kitchens long gone. She didn't notice at first that Elias paused when she did, that the boy lingered longer by the stairs. But one morning, as snow began to threaten the hills, she found a tin of dried cherries on her shelf. No note. Just there. A kindness given in silence. She made a pie. It took all day. When Elias came in from the barn, the scent stopped him in the doorway. Smells like memory, he said. She looked up. Good or bad? Both. The pie vanished by sundown. Elias ate 3 slices. The boy, though unseen, left only crumbs. Later that night, she opened her trunk. Beneath folded calico and stitched handkerchiefs lay a marriage certificate, torn across the middle. Her name still legible. Is scrawled over. She held it in her lap, the ink faded but not gone. The fire cracked. She fed it the paper. Watched the edges curl and blacken. In the morning she rose to find Elias already up, a pot of coffee on the stove. Wagons hitched, he said. Need supplies. She nodded. As they rode into town, the boy sat between them. He didn't speak, but he held her sleeve when the wind blew hard. And when they passed the preacher's wife, who glared like judgment made flesh, the boy leaned closer. She sings, he whispered, when she thinks no one hears. Elias looked over at her. She kept her gaze forward, but her hands trembled slightly on the reins. At the mercantile she gathered sugar, flour, salt. Behind her, murmurs swirled like winter dust. She's got the widower wrapped. Probably already moved into the bed. Elias didn't speak, but when they stepped back into the light, he offered his hand to help her up the wagon. Held it a second longer than necessary. The town watched. Let them. That night she made roast chicken with rosemary. The boy ate 2 helpings. Elias said nothing, but his plate was clean. She washed dishes alone, the lantern flickering low. Her reflection wavered in the window pane. Older, yes, but not gone. She heard the footsteps behind her. Elias. He didn't touch her. Just stood, the way a tree stands when it's learned that bending is not the same as breaking. You keep this place alive, he said, voice quiet. She turned to him. Her eyes were tired but not empty. I just cook, she whispered. He shook his head. No. You stayed. Outside the wind softened. The snow that had threatened now drifted light and fine, touching earth like forgiveness. And in the corner of the room, the boy curled in a chair, drawing another crooked horse by the firelight, his face calm at last. She leaned against the counter, closed her eyes, and let the warmth settle into her bones. The ranch had not asked for a cook. What it needed was still becoming clear. She woke before the sun. Every morning began the same. Silence thick in the rooms, cold in the floorboards, her breath fogging the window before the fire took. She dressed by lantern light, wrapping her shawl tight, moving barefoot across wooden planks that remembered too many winters. Downstairs, she coaxed the stove to life with kindling and patience, struck the match with care, and fed the fire like it might repay her with something more than heat. The boy never came down. She left a plate outside his door each morning, simple meals, warm and thoughtful. Toasted bread, a poached egg, sometimes berries preserved in sugar. She never knocked again after the first week. The plate was always empty by noon, and one day she found the fork cleaned, the napkin folded, returned exactly as she'd left it. It felt like a whisper of gratitude. Not loud. Not enough to chase away ghosts. But something. Her days were carved in quiet rhythm, chores stitched together with thought. She gathered eggs from chickens who had grown used to her soft voice and slow hands. She chopped wood when Elias didn't. Hauled water. Shook out the bedding and sewed where seams had given up. Her presence folded into the house like another wall or beam, not central but necessary. Elias rarely spoke more than a sentence. We're low on lard. Storm might come Thursday. Don't bother with that fence, it's going down soon. But the sharpness in his voice had softened. The bark had worn down to bark dust. And when she set down his plate each night, he met her eyes now, just for a second longer than before. She noticed things. The way he winced when he rose from a chair, favoring his left knee. The way he ran his thumb over the edge of his mug before taking a sip. How he always glanced toward the stairs before saying anything at all, like listening for the boy even if he never expected to hear him. And the boy, small and brown-haired, no more than 9, left signs of his world. Chalk marks on the porch post. A tiny bundle of feathers tucked under a floorboard in the barn. A worn boot print beside the chicken coop one morning, left before the dew had dried. He watched her, that much was clear. Through doorways, around corners, from windows when he thought she wasn't looking. Once, while hanging laundry, she saw him crouched behind the rain barrel, eyes wide, not scared exactly, just uncertain. She didn't speak. Just kept pinning sheets, the wind tugging at them like sails, pretending not to see him. That evening, a wooden horse appeared on the kitchen table. Crude, whittled from pine, one leg slightly shorter than the others. No note. No sound. But she left it on the mantel above the fire, proud as if it were carved from gold. Later, when Elias sat down with his supper, he glanced at it, then at her. He used to make those for her, he said. Before. She didn't ask. Didn't need to. She only nodded and returned to washing the dishes, sleeves damp and hands red from scrubbing. Sometimes she heard him crying. Not loud, not like the grief of someone who expects comfort, but quiet, like a broken note held under water. Once she stood outside his door in the dark, her hand resting on the wood. She didn't knock. Didn't go in. She just listened, eyes closed, and let the sound settle into her chest like another task to carry. One morning Elias returned from town early. His face was drawn, mouth thin. "They're talking," he said. She didn't stop peeling the potatoes. "Preacher's wife, Mrs. Halbert, says she heard you were put out from Kansas City. Something about a husband. A baby." Her hands paused, knife resting against the brown skin of the spud. Then resumed. "Preacher's wife likes to talk," she said softly. He stood in the doorway, thumbs hooked into his belt, hat low over his brow. "You don't need to explain. I wouldn't know where to begin." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual, as if trying to read the whole story in her face. She didn't give it to him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, she kept the house alive. Through pie crusts and warm quilts, through sweeping and mending, through the quiet grace of someone who had no more energy to demand love, but could offer the shape of it anyway. The chickens grew tame. They followed her through the yard, clucking softly as if they too had stories. She gave them names she never said aloud: Sweetie, Trouble, Harriet. One laid eggs with speckles. She put those aside for the boy. One afternoon she found him in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay. He startled when he saw her but didn't run. Just sat, arms wrapped around his knees. She didn't speak. Just sat beside him, a few feet away, letting the silence settle like dust. After a while he passed her a drawing. Charcoal on paper, 2 chickens, one wearing what might have been a bonnet. She smiled. "They look like Henrietta and Mabel," she said. He didn't smile back. But he didn't look away either. That night, she left his drawing on the mantel beside the wooden horse. The boy said nothing. But the next day there was another. This time a picture of the house with smoke curling from the chimney. The kitchen had become warmer, not from the fire, but from the way life had quietly crept in. A soft rug by the door. A jar of preserved peaches Elias had brought back without a word. She used them in cobbler and he scraped his plate clean. "You cook like someone who remembers better days," he said, not looking at her. She turned to the sink. "Or like someone trying to remember them." He left then, but the next day she found a tin of cinnamon sticks tucked beside the flour. A gesture. Nothing more. But her hands shook when she picked them up. She added cinnamon to the morning oats. The boy ate 3 spoonfuls. That afternoon, Elias stood in the doorway watching her hang laundry again. The wind caught a pillowcase and wrapped it briefly around her face. She laughed without thinking, a real laugh, too loud and sudden. He blinked at the sound. Then smiled. Not wide. Not fast. But enough to leave something behind in the air between them. The days slipped by with soft edges. No grand declarations. No sudden changes. Just the slow growing of trust in the way the floor stopped creaking where she walked. In the way Elias left tools in a tidy pile for her by the shed, knowing she'd use them. In the way the boy started sitting at the top of the stairs during supper, just close enough to hear voices, just far enough not to be called down. She never asked him to join. But one evening, as dusk bled across the hills, he descended 3 steps and sat on the bottom one. Elias glanced at him, then at her. Neither said a word. She brought him a bowl and set it down beside him. He didn't eat until she returned to the table. He finished the whole thing. And when she rose to collect the dishes, he whispered, almost inaudible, "Thank you." It was the first time he had spoken in her presence. The words clung to her as she washed that bowl more carefully than any other dish she'd ever handled. Later, Elias sat beside the fire, polishing his boots. The boy slept upstairs. The house was quiet in the way only a content home can be, nothing needing, nothing pressing. "She smiles more," the boy had said once to Elias when he thought she couldn't hear. And now Elias looked up, met her eyes across the room and said in that low voice of his, "You've brought something back to this place. Something I thought was gone." She didn't answer. But her hands paused at the apron strings, then slowly untied them. Outside, the moon rose silver and full, the prairie stretching out beneath it like a promise. And in that house, once filled with silence, there bloomed something quiet but unmistakable, belonging. Sunday mornings and dust bell came quiet and judgmental. Church bells rang not to invite, but to remind. Remind the lost they were noticed. Remind the redeemed they'd better stay that way. She sat alone on the back pew, hands folded neat in her lap. The boy was beside her, boots swinging off the floor. Elias had stayed home, claiming a headache, though she suspected he just had no patience for sermons that tangled grace with gossip. The preacher spoke of temptation in soft tones, but his wife's gaze was sharper than any scripture. When the service ended, murmurs rose before the hymn echoes even faded. She could feel the whispers sliding through her like cold fingers. She's still there? In his house. No kin. No ring. Not right. Not decent. Mrs. Halberd, the preacher's wife, draped in somber velvet, waited outside the church fence like a spider in a shawl. Her voice was calm when she approached, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. Lovely to see you out, dear. The Lord welcomes everyone, even those still searching their way back. She nodded, lips pressed flat. Behind her, the boy gripped her skirt. Not out of fear but in recognition. He knew the tone. Children do. You planning to stay long with Mr. Granger? Mrs. Halberd went on, voice dipped in honey that had gone to rot. Folks might misunderstand. Especially when there's a child in the home. I'm the cook, she said evenly. Well, let's hope that's all you're cooking. The woman's smile vanished before she turned to speak with another parishioner, leaving her standing there, cheeks burning in the sun, the boy silent as ever. That night, the silence at supper was heavier. The boy ate, but he didn't smile. Elias watched her with something bordering on apology in his eyes. People talk, he said after the dishes had been cleared. Let them, she replied, voice firm but low. I've lived through worse than a few tongues wagging. He hesitated. Did you? She paused in drying a dish. Then, still looking at the window, she answered. He left the day the baby was born. Never even held her. Said I made her wrong. She died 2 nights later. He left a note that said, some things don't get fixed. I spent 3 years trying to believe he meant the baby. Elias said nothing. Only stood, crossed the room and took the towel from her hands. He dried the last plate himself, careful and deliberate. The next morning word spread fast. A rider had come through, name of Harlan Riggs, an old ranch hand who once worked 2 towns over. The same town she'd left in silence. He'd recognized her in the mercantile, loud and confident, jaw like a boot heel and eyes always searching for weakness. I knew her, he told the barkeep. Woman like that don't belong on a ranch with a kid. She's bad luck. Every man she's touched's gone cold or crazy. By dusk, she could feel the weight of eyes again, long stares from behind curtains, slow turns of heads as she passed. Even the chickens seemed to sense it, feathers ruffling when she fed them, the wind harsher than it had been the day before. Elias came back from town that evening with his jaw set like stone. Riggs is stirring trouble, he said. Claiming things. Let him, she replied. They won't believe him if they weren't already looking for something to hate. But Elias shook his head. He's not the type to stop at words. That night she bolted the doors for the first time. Not because she was afraid, but because she'd learned long ago that evil rarely needed permission to enter. The boy didn't speak, but his drawings changed. No more horses or houses. Just a woman standing alone in a storm. She found it on the mantel and folded it gently, hiding it in the drawer where she kept matches and spare thread. On Monday the gunshot came near sundown. She was hanging laundry when the sound cracked through the air, sharp, close, familiar. The chickens scattered. She dropped the basket, heart thudding like thunder. A second shot rang out, this time closer. The boy was on the porch, eyes wide. She moved fast, pulling him behind her, her breath ragged. Then Elias emerged from the trees near the edge of the property, rifle slung over his shoulder, dragging something limp behind him. Harlan Riggs, wounded but alive, was cursing between clenched teeth, blood staining his side. Came to the house, Elias said, voice even but shaking at the edges. Said he wanted to talk. Tried to get in through the back. I gave him warning. He didn't listen. She helped him get Riggs onto the wagon. The man spat blood and bile but offered no more threats. I'll take him to the sheriff, Elias said. You stay here. When he returned hours later, the fire had gone low and the boy was asleep. She was mending a tear in Elias's coat by lantern light. He won't press charges, Elias said. Said he tripped over a fence post. Sheriff don't believe him. But no one's going to jail over it. She nodded, fingers still working the needle through wool. Thank you, she said softly. He sat across from her, arms resting on his knees. I didn't do it for thanks, he said. I did it because he was wrong. You didn't bring trouble here. You steadied the place. Me. My boy. The room was warm and quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I don't need to be saved, she whispered. I know. That's why I did it. The next morning, the gossip in town turned sharp and confused. Harlan Riggs had left without a word. Some said he was run off. Others said he'd seen something in the woods that rattled him. No one knew the truth. But more than one person noticed Elias Granger standing straighter, looking people in the eye again. And when she walked into the mercantile for flour, the barkeep tipped his hat, not out of politeness but something nearer to respect. Still, the whispers never stopped entirely. But they grew quieter, unsure of themselves. That night, after the dishes were done and the house was hushed, the boy came downstairs in his nightshirt and climbed into the chair beside the fire. She's not going anywhere, he said to Elias. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even hope. Just truth stated plain. Elias looked at her then, something steady in his gaze. She held it for a long moment, her hands resting still in her lap. I reckon not, she said, and the words tasted like a promise too long delayed. Outside, the moon hung low and full, casting long silver shadows over the hills. And inside, in that small, hard-earned quiet, a family was beginning to take root in the place where shame had once lived. The snow arrived before the leaves had fully fallen. One morning, she stepped onto the porch and found the earth whitewashed, the sky muted like an old hymn. Frost clung to the railing. The chickens stayed in their coop, feathers puffed and restless. Too early, Elias said behind her, squinting into the cold. Winter's rushing things this year. She wrapped her shawl tighter, eyeing the sky. It usually does when you're not ready. Inside, the house shrank with the cold. Rooms closed themselves off. Fireplaces snapped and groaned. The boy lingered downstairs longer now, keeping close to the warmth. He brought his drawings to the hearth, birds with outstretched wings, men on horseback, a woman holding a lantern against the dark. His face had thinned some, but there was brightness in him now, flashes of it like gold under silt. He started helping in the kitchen too. Tentative at first, handing her ingredients without a word, brushing flour from the table with solemn care. She never asked more of him than he gave. When he burned his thumb on the stove and didn't cry, she kissed the red welt without thinking. He blinked at her, unsure, then nodded once and kept stirring. Elias watched it all with the quiet of a man who'd once believed nothing good would grow again. He chopped extra wood without being asked, fixed the loose shutter. When the chimney clogged, he climbed onto the roof in sleet and came down soaked, hands raw. She met him at the door with a towel and said nothing. He didn't flinch when her fingers brushed his face. They were becoming something, not lovers not yet, but a rhythm, a steadiness. They moved through each day like two threads braided in the same rope, pulling the weight of what had been, what might still come. One night, a storm pinned them inside with wind that howled like grief. The fire sputtered. Snow piled at the door. She made stew with the last of the potatoes, thick and steaming. They ate by lamplight, the boy curled in a blanket nearby, eyes half shut. After supper, Elias poured whiskey into 2 tin cups. He handed her one, sat across from her on the floor, back against the wall. You ever miss where you came from? He asked. She thought a moment. No. I just miss who I thought I was, back when I had dreams that didn't end in silence. He took a slow sip. That man, your husband. He ever come looking? She shook her head. Not once. He signed his name clean on the divorce paper and didn't leave a return address. Elias nodded. Mine died screaming. She was good, but the labor went bad. I blamed the boy. Not outright, but in the quiet ways that cut deepest. She watched him over the rim of her cup. He knows you don't anymore. I'm not sure I've earned that. His voice cracked a little. But I'm trying. She set her cup down, rested her hands in her lap. That's all any of us can do, Elias. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things unspoken, shared now without the need to explain. The next morning, the boy was the first to the stove. She found him turning kindling with a stick, teeth chattering but determined. I can do it, he said, looking at her fully. She smiled, handed him the match. Then do it right. Gentle. Fire doesn't like to be rushed. He lit it on the second try. Pride bloomed across his face like spring dared early. That day they cooked together, biscuits from scratch, eggs fried golden. Elias took his plate and sat by the window watching snow drift like feathers. She joined him, the boy between them. They ate in silence, but it was the kind that needed no filling. Afterward, she stitched by the fire, fixing holes in a wool coat too large to ever be hers. The boy sketched beside her. Elias read from a battered almanac aloud, his voice soft and steady. The room was warm. Say. Then the fire dimmed. She stood to add more wood when the door rattled hard, 3 sharp knocks followed by a pause. Elias rose, his hand already on the rifle leaning by the wall. The boy froze, charcoal in hand. When the door opened, it was only the sheriff. Coat dusted with snow, hat dripping. Didn't mean to startle, he said. Just checking in. Roads'll be impassable soon. Want to make sure you're all right out here. We're fine, Elias said, but his tone carried weight. The sheriff nodded, looked at her. His eyes softened. You've done good with this place. A man can tell. She didn't speak, just inclined her head. The sheriff looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. He tipped his hat and left. When Elias shut the door, she exhaled. Thought it might be trouble, she admitted. It was once, he replied. Now, I think they're starting to see. Snow kept falling for days after. They slept with extra quilts. She taught the boy how to boil water on the stove for washing. He took to it well, steady hands, careful movements. She caught him singing once. Low, breathy, almost too soft to hear. It was the same lullaby she hummed at dusk when folding linens. She didn't mention it. One evening, after a long day of mending and cooking, Elias poured them both a second cup of coffee and sat close enough their knees touched. You ever think of leaving? He asked, voice low. I used to. When my hands weren't busy, my mind wandered. And now? She looked toward the fire, where the boy was nodding off again in his blanket cocoon. She reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. He didn't stir. I stopped wondering when I might belong somewhere, she said softly. Then I looked up one day and I already did. Elias swallowed hard. I'm not good at saying things. You don't need to be. He reached for her hand then, hesitant, rough, and she let him. Their fingers interlaced like it had always been meant to happen in winter, beside the fire, with the wind scratching softly at the door. Outside the sky had cleared. Moonlight spilled across the snow, casting pale blue shadows across the yard. The barn roof glistened. The fence line shimmered. Inside, 3 people sat quietly, sharing warmth not just of the hearth, but of something more lasting. Something not easily shaken. And in that flickering light, hands held and hearts unspoken, it was clear to all of them, though no one dared name it yet, that winter had not come to end things, but to begin again. The thaw came slow, creeping through the land like a hesitant apology. Snow melted in patches, revealing stubborn earth and last season's dead grass. The boy was the first to notice the buds, tiny trembling things on the edge of branches, green so pale it was almost white. She saw them too through the kitchen window while kneading dough. The light had changed. Softer now, less bruised by winter. It spilled into the house like grace finally come. Elias had begun rising early again, though the chores hadn't demanded it. He just seemed restless. Alive in a way he hadn't been. He moved through the barn with a purpose that hadn't been there in years, and when he returned, there was often dirt under his nails and something new in his eyes, like hope, but steadier. One afternoon he brought her outside. The boy trailed behind, hands stuffed in his pockets. I want to show you something, Elias said. They walked past the barn, beyond the frost-damp fence posts, to where a low stretch of pasture reached toward the trees. The land was humble but solid. Sprouts of early wheat poked through in scattered clusters. I'm selling this parcel, Elias said. Not to leave. To start again. She turned to him, unsure. I want it signed over in your name, he added, voice low, as if saying it too loud would ruin it. You've done more with this place than I ever could. It should be yours, at least part of it. Her breath caught. You don't need to. I know what I need, he said. And what I want. This land's worth more in your hands than in mine alone. The boy stepped forward and tugged at her sleeve. He looked up, squinting into the sunlight. You made it home again, he said simply. She felt something shift inside her, something deep and tired and wounded that had kept waiting for rejection even after it had been proven wrong. That evening word got out. It always did in Dust Bell. She'd gone to the store for sugar, and by the time she returned to the wagon, the whispers had bloomed like wildflowers in drought. Granger gave her land? Woman doesn't even wear his name. It ain't right. It's dangerous setting examples like that. Mrs. Halbert crossed her path near the saloon. The woman didn't bother to hide her disdain. I suppose you think decency is optional now, she said. A woman playing wife without a wedding. She didn't respond. Not at first. But the silence grew too loud. I didn't come here to play anything, she replied, voice calm. I came to work. I stayed to live. Then live proper, Mrs. Halbert snapped. Marry him if you must. or get out. That night, Elias stood on the porch, sharpening a blade. She told him what happened the way she always did now, not to stir action but to empty her chest of weight. He listened, hands never pausing. "You want to marry me?" he asked when she finished. She blinked. "That's not a proposal." "No," he agreed. "It's a question." She studied him in the amber light. The man who had given her space without pity, who had stitched silence into safety, who had built a life beside her without once demanding anything more than what she was willing to give. "I don't need your name," she said. "But I'd take it if it meant we stood together in front of the ones who need reminding what love looks like." Elias set the blade down. "Then we'll do it. For us. For him." He nodded toward the window where the boys' drawing of their house still hung, crude but complete. 2 days later, they rode into town. The boy sat between them, proud as a sheriff. No flowers, no lace. Just truth, worn and clean. The preacher hesitated when they stood in front of him. Elias spoke first. "She's already my home," he said. "This is just the paper to match the truth." The ceremony was short. The ring came from a silver button she'd sewn once into his collar. She'd polished it smooth, looped it with a strip of leather. When he slid it onto her finger, her hands didn't tremble. The town watched. Some in disbelief. Some in anger. Some with the kind of stillness that suggested regret. As they left the chapel, the boy took her hand. "Can I call you Ma now?" he asked. She knelt, brushed his hair back. "Only if you want to." "I do." The word hung in the air like a vow. But peace never lasted long in places where pride still ruled. A man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. A cousin of Elias's late wife, tall and sour-faced. He'd stayed silent for years, but now bitterness gave him voice. "She don't belong in that house," he said. "It's an insult to the dead." Elias stepped forward, eyes calm. "You're right." A murmur rippled. "She don't belong in the house the way it was," Elias continued, "because she made it into something better. Something alive." The man scowled. "You forget whose blood runs in that boy? You think a cook's enough to raise him right." It was the boy who answered, small but fierce. "She's more than enough." Elias didn't raise his voice. "This town can talk. They've been talking. But we're done listening." And then from the back of the crowd came a sound. One clap. Then another. And another. It wasn't applause. It was recognition. Mrs. Halbert turned away, eyes narrowed. But others stayed. Eyes softened. By sundown they were back at the ranch. The pasture glowed gold under the spring sky, shadows long, everything trembling with new life. She stood in the doorway that night, watching Elias tuck the boy into bed. A simple act. But in it was everything they'd fought to build. She returned to the kitchen. The fire still burned, the smell of bread lingering in the walls. On the mantel, the wooden horse stood beside a fresh drawing. 3 figures, hand in hand, beneath a sky full of stars. Elias joined her, set down 2 cups of coffee. "They'll talk again," he said. "They always will." He smiled. "Then let him. Let him see what staying looks like. What building looks like." She nodded, reaching for his hand. And in that moment, in the soft hush of a home earned the hard way, the past settled into peace. They didn't speak of forever. Just of tomorrow. Of planting. Of teaching the boy to ride. Of baking pies for neighbors too proud to ask but too curious to refuse. The future waited, wide and unwritten. And when she stepped outside to feel the night air, the stars above blinking like old friends, she whispered a thought not meant for anyone but the wind. Maybe love doesn't come loud. Maybe it just stays. And the wind, warm now, carried it on.